Of course. Welcome. Yes, welcome to today's general lecture presented by the Department of Political Science, Universitas Padjadjaran. Yeah, my name is Kirana, and I'll be responsible for hosting this event. Today, we are going to cover the topic of conflict resolution and peace for Palestine. This is a very interesting topic because, it involves a contemporary issue, and I'm sure you have read the news all over the internet for the past couple of weeks about the Israel military aggression against Gaza, Palestine, and how it sort of impacts the humanitarian condition. However, this public lecture will discuss this issue from the political perspective, especially the power relations between countries and also the UN's role for conflict resolution and peace in Palestine. So, this event will be divided into 4 parts. We're going to have an opening speech from the head of Political Science Department, Dr. Carolina Pascarina. Then we'll proceed to the speech from our speakers, followed by responses from our panel. At the end of the session, you will have the opportunity to submit text questions to the speakers by typing your questions into the chat box, and I will collect these and address them during the Q&A session. And you may also address your question directly by turning on your mic. So today I'm very glad to welcome our honorable speaker, Dr. Jawad Akhtar Mohammed. He is an external advisor for United Nations in Middle East and also lecturer at Swinburne University of Technology, Australia, Department of Strategy, International Business, and Entrepreneurship. He is also nominated among 1,000 world's top thinkers and intellectuals, great minds of 21st century, and top 100 educators in the world, nominated by American Biographical Institute. So welcome to Dr. Jawad Mohammed. Thank you for joining us today. And also we have 2 lecturers from Department of Political Science, Universitas Padjadjaran as the discussant panel. Welcome to Dr. Yusa Djuyandi, expert on security studies, and also Pak Luthfi Hamzah Husin, expert on democracy studies. So without further ado, I will turn the time over to Dr. Carolina Pascarina as the head of Political Science Department to give your opening speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kirana. Hello, Dr. Jawad Akhtar. How are you? Okay, I will start my opening speech. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon and welcome to all the participants of this general lecture organized by the Department of Political Science, Faculty of Social and Political Science, Universitas Padjadjaran. Today we will discuss an issue that is currently very popular, the conflict resolution and peace for Palestine. We have our special guest today as our main speaker, Dr. Jawad Akhtar Mohammed, as before introduced by the MC. He is an external advisor for United Nations in the Middle East, and I believe he is very well informed and very expert. We would like to say thank you, Dr. Jawad. We're very glad that you're with us today and share information and thought about Palestine issue. This webinar will also be hosted by Dr. Yusa Djuyandi and Luthfi Husin MA as discussion. Both are our lecture at the Department of Political Science, this is UNPAD, with expertise in security studies and democracy studies. This general lecture is part of an activity organized by the undergraduate and postgraduate program of political science in our department to study the current issue in global politics. So without further ado, let's begin this general lecture. Thank you very much for attending this general lecture. Okay, I'll give back to Kirana. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you very much, Ibu Carol, for the speech. That was wonderful. Now, I want to pass things over to Mr. Mohammed to start your speech. Hello, sir. How are you? Can you hear my voice?
Well, are you telling me?
Yes, yes.
Oh,
So
sorry,
yeah.
sorry, I was.
Yes.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum.
Yeah, it's okay. You may start your speech now. Thank you.
Okay, shall I start?
Yes.
How long do I have? How long do you want me to talk?
Well, it's about, sorry, let me check. About 20 to 30 minutes.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for giving me the opportunity, Dr. Yusa and the Dean. Thank you, and all our students and audiences. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to you about a very hot topic at the moment. Can you hear me, by the way? Can you hear me properly?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
Okay, that's good. So, Dr. Yusa requested me to talk about Palestine, the conflicting issues up there, and the peace process. Now, I've been involved for the past few years and also for a long time in the diplomatic mission and advising the United Nations in the MENA region. And before the lecture, I've been thinking about whether to talk to you as an academic or as an expert or person who's exposed to the environment and situation in the Middle East for a few years, or just a human being. It's a dilemma in today's world. You know, I'm not a professor of politics, by the way. I'm a professor of international business and Islamic studies, but I'll try and address to you as much as possible the things that is very important in today's world. Now, the issue of Palestine, the way I say it, and as I said, while I was researching, I thought, well, I can give you an academic lecture. You guys will get bored because you can read articles, you can read a lot of materials and in the news and media and everything about a lot of things happening in Palestine and Israel and the conflicting situation and its environment. I thought I'll share some of my experience in the region when I traveled over there, along with some knowledge and opinion of my own, and leave the desk open to you to think about what the situation is. Now, when we talk about Palestine and Israel, we generally look at the political concept or the violence that is erupting up there. Have we ever looked at in a different context, a different perspective? I'll try and present to you my perspective of Israel-Palestine conflict. And well, I cannot give you a roadmap to peace because no one could so far for the past 75 years. So please don't expect me to give you a peace plan and work on it. However, I've spoken to presidents and prime ministers and people in the region and I've given my view. Unfortunately, some did except but most of them did not, as we see. Now I present or I look at the issue of Israel-Palestine conflict from three perspectives, if you like. One is the spiritual aspect of the region. The conflict of Israel and Palestine has a religio-spiritual aspect. I'm not sure if you're aware, or you might be, but not many focus has been given on this. The second one is, of course, political, and the third is humanitarian. Now, I'll try and explain in a very short, brief note as to what I mean by these three perspectives of Palestinian and Israeli conflict. Now, if you look at the socio-cultural, religious issues in the region and the spiritual aspect of it, the land of Palestine, as it is called in Arabic, Al-Quds, it is holy, sacred, and important to three major religions of the world: Judaism. But why would the Jewish fight for it while the Muslims also fight for it, and the Christians, all three religions will be fighting for that place? What is in that place? If you look at, and if I may say so, the Arabs have been inhabitants of that land for centuries. Well, it was not even called Palestine, if you know that. Palestine was a name given by the British Empire. The original name or the known name was Al-Quds. Now that place for the Jewish tradition is holy as it is for us, Mecca is for us as Muslims. Now they consider Jerusalem to be Mecca for them. We Muslims, we consider it holy for several reasons. And of course the Christians follow it as well. Now, according to the spiritual and socio-religious concept, the Jewish claim the land to be theirs as a promised land. And I'm sure all of you know about this issue of promised land. But who promised the land to whom? Have you ever pondered about the question as to who promised the land to whom? It was Moses who brought his people from Egypt to Palestine, and all of a sudden they get this called promised land. Actually, if you look at the historical context, it was from Iraq, Babylon, to Palestine, Jerusalem. And he promised this land to his people or his children. Now, if you look at this promised land, it actually constitutes the Levant. I'm sure you've heard of the word Levant, right? The ISIL, Islamic State of Levant and Iraq and all those things, the extremist stuff was happening in the past few years. Now, where did this Levant come? This Levant is the promised land promised by Abraham alayhi salam to his people and his children. Now, the Levant would consist of land from Iraq between the two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, as it is called Mesopotamia, between the two rivers, and it will go all the way to Syria, coming down to Sinai with Jerusalem or Al-Quds as its capital. Now, this was Levant, the promised land. Now, to whom was this promised? Children of Abraham. Who are the children of Abraham? Now, there is a big question mark. The Jewish claim to be Bani Israel, children of Israel, who was also children of Abraham. We Muslims are Bani Ismail. We are also children of Abraham. And the Christians who follow Jesus Christ or Isa alayhi salam also claim to be children of Abraham. So if we look at from the religious, socio-religious perspective, historically, that land, if we were to take it as a promised land, belongs to all who were promised, the Muslims, the Christians, and the Jewish alike. So no one group can claim its ownership of the land on its own, number one. Number two, the Jewish were persecuted by the Roman Empire and the Christians, and it was the Muslims who saved them. If you look back into history again, it was during the time of Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anhu, when he conquered and won over Jerusalem, and he went in there and asked about the Jewish Bani Israel families and people. They said they were persecuted and thrown out of that place. And it was he who brought in 80 families into Palestine, into Al-Quds, the Jerusalem, and let them live, worship. It was the Muslims who brought in the Jewish. I'm not being very radical about it. I'm just presenting the historical context of the religious, social-religious situation. So it was the Muslims who always saved the Jewish from persecution from the Roman Empire, from the later on Byzantines, the Christians, and others. But today's world, we see it is the Jewish who are killing and persecuting the Muslims in that region. Now they say we are the people of the land, so are the Muslims and the Christians. Now for them, it is the Haikal-e-Sulaimani, the grand temple, which was equivalent to a Kaaba in Mecca for them. It was built, started by Dawud alayhi salam and finished by Sulaiman alayhi salam, supported by the jinn, as we know the history in the Islamic context. Now for them it is holy, that's fine. For the Christians, it is post-Jesus era. But for the Muslims, what is it? It is a place where Nabi Karim Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, when asked about Al-Quds, Jerusalem, and he said, this is the land of resurrection on the day of judgment. Yawm al-Qiyamah, Maidan al-Hashr. It is there. Alhamdulillah, I've been there and I've seen this hadith on the gate of Al-Aqsa Mosque, where it is written in a very big one. Dr. Yusa, if you want, I can send you the picture later on about this hadith, where Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that this is the land of resurrection, Maidan Hashr, or the land of Hashr, where the judgment will happen. That's number one importance to us. Number two, this is the place where Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam got the name Imam al-Anbiya. This is the place for Miraj al-Isra, when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was taken from Mecca to Jerusalem, to Sidratul Muntaha, past 7 heavens to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How important that could be for us. Our Prophet, till he died, had his heart in Jerusalem. Although he was from Mecca, settled in Medina. For us Muslims, Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem is as important as anything for the Jews. Then we have a third version of this importance to Al-Quds. It was our first Qibla. Al-Aqsa has the Masjid al-Qibli, which was our first Qibla. And that is very important for us Muslims as well. We appreciate the importance of the Jewish. We protected them for ages. And we have never, ever shed blood of the Jewish in Jerusalem. In fact, if you look into history, 10 centuries ago, when the Christians entered Jerusalem, the whole of Jerusalem was flooded with blood. Blood of whom? Muslim men, women, and children. And then Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi came in and won over after 3 centuries of battle in Crusades era. And since then, the Muslims have been protected. So this is the spiritual and religious aspect, to cut short in brief. Now, if we move into the political aspect of Palestine conflict, we look at it from a perspective where the world leaders are getting together to find a solution. But solution for what? If you live in your home and you're thrown out of your home all of a sudden over a night, and your home is captured by someone else, you are homeless, not the person who has occupied your home. And yet we say that there has to be peace between each other. Is that possible? Is that meaningful? The world leaders are playing a mockery of the world population in the name of politics. Is this politics? You throw out someone from their home and you make them refugees overnight, millions of refugees. And the Al-Nakba, if you know, I'm sure all of you are into political science and political history, Al-Nakba, which happened in 1948, overnight, a plane landed from Russia and the whole of the village was evacuated, people massacred, and a state of Israel was formed overnight. We're not disputing at this stage about whether Israel exists or does not exist or so on and blah and blah and blah. We have given the right of existence to Israel as Muslims around the world or as Palestinians have accepted it. But how can they accept someone who have persecuted them for ages, for 7 decades, over 7 decades, and there's no concession? Now, if I go into your home as a guest and throw you out of your home, and then I show mercy upon you, is that humanistic world politics? Where is human rights over here? Where are the world leaders who talk about love and peace and harmony around the world? Where are the world leaders who have been propagating, advocating human rights across the globe, but they themselves are violating human rights? A child being killed in the name of extremism and terrorism. If I am saving my house, how can I be a terrorist? If I am fighting to safeguard my rights, how can I be a terrorist? There's a different fine line. But these people, due to their capture over media, due to their overconfidence in capturing and controlling the world politics, they believe whatever they say can be accepted. Now, politically, I personally believe that the Oslo Accord was a green moment in this dark patch of history, where Bill Clinton came along with Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat and signed an accord where two-state solution was found and peaceful coexistence of Palestine and Israel was agreed upon. However, the accord was left incomplete because of Jerusalem being the capital of both the states. There was this dispute about Jerusalem, which the Palestinian Authority could not accept anything without Jerusalem. How can Palestine exist without Al-Aqsa, without Al-Quds? I told you in the very first beginning the socio-cultural, religious, and spiritual importance of Muslims and Jews for that region. Now, it is very important to understand this from socio-cultural, spiritual, and religiosity into political context. Now, after the deal was signed, it was not the Muslims or the Palestinians or the Arabs or any other Muslims from around the world who killed Yitzhak Rabin. It was a Jewish extremist who assassinated him. Why? My question has always been to the head of state whenever I interact with them in the United Nations or in foreign ministries or diplomatic missions. That's why. Why are Muslims being blamed for all the mayhem, whereas you see the major assassination? Mossad is the intelligence agency of Israel, the most dreaded. You see, nowadays we talk about suicide bombing around the world, right? Who started and initiated and innovated suicide bombing? It is the Mossad. No one points finger at them. So these are questions, political questions, needs to be addressed and thought about before we talk about conflict resolution. Yes, there are a lot of blood that is being shed, but let us not forget politically, one Israeli blood is equivalent to hundreds and thousands of in Germany or Austria. Yet we are being blamed for creating anarchy. When I say we, I talk about the Palestinians and the Arab and the Muslim as a whole. You see, why I use this word we? Because as a Muslim Ummah, we have a belief system in the world that the whole world, and you in Indonesia, I'm sure will agree that the part of a body, a small minuscule part of our body is hurt, the whole body feels the pain. And this is one of the quintessential elements of Tawheed and one Ummah. That any Muslim brother suffering in any part of the world, if we, any other part of the world, do not feel the pain, we do not have Iman, we are not Muslims, we don't believe in Tawheed. So this is the result why people outside the Islamic community don't understand that Muslims anywhere in the world when suffer, it hurts every single Muslims around the world. And that's why I am in Australia or in India and you are in Indonesia, but we're talking about people thousands of miles away from us in Palestine. People being persecuted in Palestine does not directly affect us, but it affects our heart, our Iman, our Tawheed, our whole well-being of being a Muslim Ummah. Now this is important for us to understand. So from a political perspective, we talk about Palestinians creating chaos, violence, but who instigated them? Now we're talking about missiles, we're talking about rockets, we're talking about B-52 bombers against stone pelting youth, teens, young boys. People have been thrown out of their home, and yet when they protest, they are, instead of being a victim, are being called perpetrators of violence. This is not acceptable under any circumstances, in any sense of politics, of culture, or humanitarian ground. Now, I won't go more deeper into the political aspect because all of you are more experienced and expert than I am. However, I would like to emphasize on one thing before I end this lecture. Well, when you talk about Palestine, I have seen, I wanted to share a lot of things, but 20 minutes, half an hour is there. We can talk about for ages. And trust me, my brothers and sisters and friends, what I'm sharing is I've said this in front of head of states, in front of diplomats, that this is the case. And they know this very well, but they put a blind eye to it. This conflict can be resolved within a minute, provided there is a genuine interest. I will show you, or I'll just point to you before I go to the humanitarian one, a single aspect which I always share with a lot of them in the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa region. We have 1.7 billion Muslims around the world, but we have very few handful of millions of Jewish people around the world. And yet, we have seen in 1967 war, we have seen later wars, that this handful of Jewish people or the state of Israel have bombarded and lambasted the Arab region like anything and everything. The Arabs could not stand in front of them. Why? And why is Israel so particularly, so much interested and so much all out for that small piece of land? They can be given a bigger land by America or the British who set them up and established them. Today, the British and Americans shed crocodile tears for the Palestinians and Muslims around the world. Where were you when you brought in and established the state of Israel in 1948? It was the British and the Americans. It was a Marshall Plan post Second World War that the Americans through Israel. And you know, another aspect of it, it's more legal or sociocultural. Have you ever Suez Canal, which brings in billions of dollars of revenue to the region? Israel is party to it. And through that, regime because if this is resolved soon and if the things become peaceful, then they have to consider giving away, consider a lot of concessions which they do not want. Now we move from spiritual religiosity to political to a bit of business. Now I want to come to a small thing. When Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi was asked that why he staked everything for Jerusalem, what is in it? Because he was not a Palestinian. I'm sure all of you know the story of the Crusade era, King Richard and Salahuddin fight among the last of the Crusade. And Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi, without any bloodshed, actually won Jerusalem and the war. And Richard had to retreat to England, and he died on his way back. Now he was asked, why are you so interested in Jerusalem? What is it for you? And he said, nothing. And he moved on. And then he turned around and said, Jerusalem is everything for a Muslim. As I said, it is Yawm al-Hashar, on the day of judgment. That is the place of land of gathering. That's Surah Bani Israel or Surah Isra in the Quran. It has more details about it. And then it is a place where Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was given the title Imam al-Anbiya, where he led the congregation of 124,000 Ambiyas in a meeting before the Miraj. And it is a place where he went from the earth to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then our Jewish brothers, they say they have been persecuted in Germany. Muslims did not persecute them. They have been killed, genocide was committed, and any murder is condemnable. No one condones or appreciates murder, bloodshed. And we Muslims stand together in condemning genocide that happened during the Second World War, where our Jewish brothers were persecuted. However, that could not be the reason for killing Palestinians, children and women and men. That could not be the reason for overthrowing people from their home. That could not be the reason for killing and creating mayhem in a region where it should be peaceful, legal and religious manner. We have to look into the cultural aspect. Of course, it is their cultural mindset, but they have to appreciate our cultural mindset as well. Where was human rights when a 9-year-old child was shot at on the streets of Jerusalem by the Israeli forces? Where was human rights when Gaza is bombarded? Civilians are killed in the name of terrorism. Are young children and women terrorists? An eye for an eye makes the world blind. We have to remember this. Any atrocity committed against our Jewish brothers cannot be taken revenge against Muslims. We Muslims never killed any Jewish. Then why are being why are Palestinians being persecuted? When I say we, as I again said, as one ummah, we feel for them. And thus, I would like to conclude my lecture by saying that we need to be thoughtful about what is happening. There is no straightforward answer. Leaders, but with a fake heart, superficially, and being hypocritical. We are ready to give rights to the Israelis, but the Palestinians must have their rights of governance and a country of their own. Because it was Palestinian which existed. It was Palestine which existed before the Nakba 1948. Where did Palestine go? How is this possible in today's modern civilized world that overnight a country is gone and a new country is created and the people who lived in that country are persecuted for ages to come? So politically, I believe that two-state solution is a possibility with Jerusalem. I've been there, I've seen, and I've seen the Israeli apartheid regime. I've seen it firsthand when I was involved with the consulate of South Africa as a diplomat, as a business consul in their consulate in the late 90s under the presidency of a great legend Nelson Mandela. We heard about pre-Mandela era South Africa being apartheid. I've never seen it myself. We were too young, but I've heard about it. And I was proud to be part of the South African government and consulate in promoting trade and investment and cultural interaction around the globe. But I saw apartheid for the first time when I visited Jerusalem, Israel and Jerusalem. And there I saw how Israelis behave with the Palestinians. We behave better with our dogs and cats and animals than the Palestinians are dealt with by the Israelis in their own land. I had tears in my eyes and I could not believe that we live in a civilized world. Palestinian women were being humiliated. Palestinian women were being insulted in public for just being Palestinian by the Israelis. Palestinian children were being beaten up. Palestinian men were being persecuted and insulted for nothing, for nothing. Even in the airport and the border control I saw, they took a side. Clearly it was, racial profiling. When they saw even American Palestinians, Australian Palestinians, I went from Australia. Of course, I was on a UN mission, but then it was out of protocol, not on my protocol way. And when they saw American, British, Australian passport holders, but Palestinians, they took them aside and they were insulting them for nothing. This was clear case of apartheid firsthand, which I've seen. And I'm ashamed that we live in a so-called civilized world today, whereby we say we are much civilized than people were earlier. I'm ashamed to say that it is totally wrong, utterly wrong. We live in a world where people misbehave with people, animals. And thus, my friends, I would say, please do consider when you're discussing about conflict resolution, three perspectives, as I said, socio-cultural, spiritual, and religious aspect, which is very important because in that context, we accept, recognize the right of the Israelis, the Jewish brothers to that land, but they must accept our emotion, our feelings, and our right of, claim over that land. So it will be a two-way traffic. On the second hand, the second aspect.
Sorry, sir. I'm sorry for you to. Yeah. You have one left, 1 minute left.
Political aspect, and the third, we got to look at the humanitarian ground. As I said, an eye for an eye will make the world blind. And as a Muslim, we must think Jerusalem is nothing, but it is everything for us. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. That was very insightful. I just want to point out some interesting point from your lecture that the Israel and Palestine issue can be seen from three perspectives: the spiritual aspects of region, humanitarian issues, and also political issues. And we need the world leaders to encourage the harmony among religions, and nothing justifies the killing of innocent children. So,
Yes,
yeah.
that's right. Yes.
Thank Thank you for your lecture. And so thank you very much for your speech. And now I will proceed to our panel, to Pak Yusa. Do you have any comment or responses? The time is yours now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kirana. The Honorable Dr. Jawad Akhtar, thank you very much. I think this when we are talking about Palestine, there's so many indicators that we can discussing about, especially not only about humanitarian aspects but also political aspects, especially when we are talking about the position of Palestine itself among the countries in the world. Because as we know that the United States also their allies for some countries, especially in Europe, hasn't recognized Palestine as the independent state. This become a big problems. That's why we cannot what push what happened in Gaza, what happened in West Bank into the International Supreme Court, because the position of Israel is quite strong, and they are being supported by the U.S. and ally. I want to give a comment about the position of 5 countries in the high-level commissions of UN who have the rights of veto, which sometimes, if one country such as US ignoring the resolutions, they can. So the high-level UN high-level commissions cannot release the resolution itself, including what happened in Palestine. There are so many countries in the world, especially the third countries in the world and developing countries, very emotionally talking about Israel, because they are thinking that there are so many aggression, so many attacks, so many such as regulations abandoned by the Israel government itself. That's why when we are talking about the Palestine Palestine issue nowadays, that we have to build a big commitment among the world, among the countries in the world, to push the 5 countries who have the veto rights to give a sanction punishment to the Israel government, including the U.S. Government itself, because as I ever see many books about how the Jews connections in the U.S. Parliament, which give what strong impact to the international policy of the U.S. itself. I have a questions to you as an expert, as an external advisor. I mean, external advisor of UN organizations for the Middle East issue. I want to know exactly about how many countries in the world want to bring a big change in the UN itself, especially it is maybe not only about Palestine and Israel case itself, but also maybe for other cases which can arrive any time that we have to solve the problems, because sometimes US and their allies is so have strong connections, and they are control the UN policy. How strong the countries in the world want to make a change in the UN itself, especially when a conflict arises, when a humanitarian crisis happens in this world. I think that I want to ask to you about the situations, and I have a suggestions. This conflict must be stopped not only in this year but also in the future, because aggressions, military bombardment to Palestine always happen in every year, not only in this year but also in the last year. in the past a few years ago, and so on. So we have to think more far, and we have to get a concrete solutions. Even maybe for some West countries has proposed the two-state solutions to solve these problems. And I have an experiment, not experiment. I have a student where while I'm teaching in Bina Nusantara University, he is have two citizenships, one Indonesian and one Israel. And every year he in the after the in the long seasonals he go to Israel to enter the military training as the IDF personnel, and that's not only 1 or 2%. As I know, there's so many people here who also have two citizenships, and for a month they are go to Israel to get basic military training as the combatants for to be prepared anytime they are asking to go to Israel to defend their state. And for some of them, two-state solutions is not a good idea. Although for some others is the two-state solution is a good idea. There's also different opinions among them, and I think yeah, as we have to discuss about these political situations, how we can give concrete solutions and how to make this peaceful progress running not only in this year but also for next year and for a long time in the future. I think that's my opinion, and my questions to you. Maybe we can start the discussions from Luthfi or also from other students or participants who attend this general lecture here. Thank you, Kirana. I give it back to you.
All right, thank you, Yusa. That was great. And I will turn the time over Luthfi for now. In case you have any additional comments or responses, please, the time is yours now.
All right, thank you, Kirana. Can you hear my voice?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
All right, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Dr. Mohammed and Pak Yusa for the insightful lecture, I think. And one thing that I'd like to add as kind of additional analysis to the analysis of Mr. Mohammed and Mr. Djuyandi is that I follow constructivism that developed in international studies, which is called securitization approach. We can analyze that how the Israeli government construct a narration, a story, a strong story about the conflict, about the current conflict between Israeli and Palestinian recent weeks. We can also analyze how the government, especially with its Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, creates a kind of meaning construct to the global countries about the conflict, how they and Benjamin Netanyahu dominates the public sphere, dominates the Western mainstream media, and how they deliver the truth, quote unquote, according to Israeli and Benjamin Netanyahu's version. One thing that we can highlight is that the term of self-defense, if we look at the current conflict between Palestinian and Israeli in recent weeks, the term of self-defense is kind of strategy that is being used by the Israeli government and of course by its prime minister to position itself, to position Israel, the state of Israel, among the global citizens, among the global countries. By the term of self-defense, Israeli government justified its act to bombard the Palestinian, get justification to attack the so-called terrorist group in Gaza Strip. And some analysts say that it's kind of victim playing. So according to this kind of construct, this kind of narration, this kind of story that Israel has to defend its territory, has to defend its citizen against the attack of a group of terrorists in Gaza, is successful to posit the position of the state of Israel in the world. I mean, the term of self-defense is successful to be a political instrument to spread the truth, quote unquote, according to the Israeli government and its prime minister. For example, with the term of self-defense constructed by the Israeli government, the public, the audience, the other countries are kind of guided to agree about the agreement of differentiation between a legal and sovereign country versus a group of terrorists, which is defined as a Hamas group in Gaza Strip. So there is kind of transformation of the conflict that began with Israel and Palestine in Sheikh Jarrah, between the Israeli police versus the citizen of Palestinian in the eastern Al-Quds or Jerusalem, especially in Sheikh Jarrah territory. And it kind of transformed, it is transformed into the conflict between the state of Israel, the legal and sovereign country, versus a group of terrorists. So this is the strong narration, this is the strong story that has been constructed by the government of Israel, and of course by its Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, or Bibi. So there is kind of shifting issue from the Israeli forces versus Palestinian in Sheikh Jarrah, the occupation held by the Israeli towards the citizen of Sheikh Jarrah in Jerusalem, into the conflict, the bigger conflict, into the escalating conflict between the Palestinian groups, which is Hamas versus the Israeli troops or Israeli military. So the issue of the occupation of Sheikh Jarrah is changed into the issue of terror, into the issue of self-defense, into the issue of the Israeli government has to defend itself from the terror, from the attack of the Hamas, and we are being forced to forget what really happens in Palestinian, which was basically about the occupation, and especially about the occupation of Sheikh Jarrah by the Israeli settlement. So according to securitization, this is kind of discursive contest between the truth version of Israeli government and the truth version of the Palestinian people. But according to this construct of self-defense, the aggressions also, we can look back into the domestic politics, both in Israel and Palestine. For example, why the conflict is being bigger and bigger between the Israeli troops or Israeli military and Hamas, because Netanyahu itself, he has a political dilemma in domestic politics in Israel parliament, because he's failed to create a strong coalition in the parliament, in Knesset, and he needed to create an enemy outside Israel and perpetuate the conflict. I mean, the conflict that is created by perpetuating the narration of self-defense, there is an enemy outside Israel. It gives many advantages politically to Netanyahu within its domestic politics. So the international conflict is highly linked to any kind of domestic politics, including the conflict between Israeli and the Palestinian. And of course, in the context of Israeli politics, Netanyahu get many advantages from the conflict, because Netanyahu, after the conflict arose, Netanyahu is seen as a national leader who can protect the Israeli from the attack of the so-called terrorists, and then Netanyahu can get what he wants politically. So according to this context, discursive battlefield between the Israeli government, who dominates the media, the mainstream media, and dominates the issue, dominates the truth in the global at the global level. The question is, again, I'd like to support the question from Dr. Mohammed and Dr. Djuyandi. How can we reach peace in the context of the subject position between Israel and Palestine? Both of them has each construct meaning construct or narration or story to disarticulate or criticize another statement or another story. On one hand, Israeli sees that or looks that the Palestinian is hegemonized by a group of terrorists, Hamas, and it can attack Israeli territory and terrorize the citizens of Israel. And on the other side, Palestinians see that Israel occupied for a long time, and the recent issue, they occupied the settlement of Palestinian were in Sheikh Jarrah. So I think it's kind of hard issue to address because the conflict that is begin from the narration, from the story, and then it strongly relates to the humanitarian issues, to the human rights issue, and so on and so on. I think that's only my additional analysis of Mr. Mohammed and Mr. Djuyandi. I think we can discuss more deeply later with another participant. Thank you, Kirana.
All right, thank you very much. That was wonderful. So there is an interesting point I want to mention again from your argument. So that by using the term of self-defense against terrorism, Israel is actually justified genocide to innocent people, and it is actually a constructed political narration that unfortunately take the bigger problem aside, which is the occupation of the oppressed people, and it is used as an advantage by Israel politicians. So that was interesting. Thank you very much. I think that's concludes the speech session from our speakers. And now we will go ahead and take some time for questions. So just a reminder, please be sure to type your question into the chat box in your control panel, or you can also raise your hand to deliver your question directly on mic. So yeah, anyone wants to give a question? Oh yeah, so Ayu Anastasia. Yes, you may open your mic now.
Okay, thank you very much, Kirana. Very good morning, Mr. Dr. Mohammed, Pak Yusa, and then Pak Luthfi. My name is Ayu, and I'm a PhD student of International Relations from Padjadjaran. I'll ask 3 questions, but before that, just to give a little bit of background, right? I've heard a lot of analysis coming from all the speakers, but I remember the infamous book of The Prince coming from Machiavelli, and it has warned us about how rulers and leaders use religion to control the society, and I think it's happening right now more than ever, and it could be a two-sword ages, right, between the good leader and the bad leader. And it has been happening in Palestine for the since 1973, for the last 73 years. And the fact that they have killed like more than 60 children and now currently occupying more region in Palestine is never going to be okay. So this is the time where the movement to call against colonial practices should be louder than ever. And it's also adding more complexity to the resolution, right? Because Israel now controlling social media companies, for example, limiting posts about Palestinian violence, and also lobbying philanthropists to stop giving aid to Palestinians. So they are coming from all levels to prevent many actors from helping the Palestinians. And now we heard from the news that the newly elected Prime Minister of Israel is very racist, and it's very clear how the statement against Arabs and also Muslims coming forward through the media. Now, referring to your previous point, right, which is the importance of global leaders to harmonize different religions, and also especially Abrahamic religion, Jewish, Christianity, and also Islam. I have 3 questions for all the speakers. Number 1, how do you foresee the role of Muslim leaders, especially the one with normalization relationship that has been happening, for example, like with Bahrain, with Emirates, including the passive-aggressive Turkey, as we know? How do you foresee the role of these Muslim leaders in the conflict between, or in the violence of Israel against Palestine? And the second question, can the resolution be any more further than a ceasefire? Are we going to witness perhaps a rebirth of United Nations Security Council, especially the veto holders? Because we've seen the global movement against Israel colonialization happening now. And the last question, we start to see the raising of social media movement, right, including from Jewish globally, against Israel government. Is it enough then to move the needle now more than ever? Yeah, so those are my questions. Really appreciate your answer. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for Ayu. So is there anyone who wants to answer first? Mr. Mohammed or Pak Yusa or Pak Luthfi? Please.
I'll let Dr. Yusa start.
Okay. I think Dr. Muhammad is more proper to answer these questions, especially you have experience.
Well, there are 3 aspects to the questions, if I'm not wrong. Can you please repeat the questions? Kirana, can you please get Ayu to repeat the questions, please?
Sure. I can do it. Okay. The first question, how do you foresee the role of Muslim leaders in this in this issue? The second one, can the resolution be any more further than a ceasefire? Are we going to witness the rebirth of United Nations Security Council due to a lot of pressure against US to make a bolder movement? And the third one, as we've seen a lot of support from Jewish.
Hold on, we'll go one by one because then it gets.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
We'll
right.
start with the role of Muslim leaders.
Yeah.
See, we can keep on going on and on and on and on about we Muslims, how good, faithful we are. This is again my personal opinion. With all due respect to our leaders around the world, we Muslims are more hypocritical than the other religious people. It is us to be blamed for our misery in the world. Why can't we, as I said in my lecture as well, 1.7 billion Muslims around the world stand together as one ummah under the leadership of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one prophet, and stand up to the world to show how united we are. Are we united? This is my question in response to your question. The Muslim world today, if you look at, are either enslaved by America, Britain, indirectly through then Israel is actually controlling the Arab world today. I have had very close interaction with the Saudi royal family members, UAE, Bahrain, Qatar. I have students, friends, and very close confidants in the royal families in those regions. And I asked them, what is this happening? And they now blame the Palestinians that they say, we have supported them, sponsored them, financed them for 70 years, and they have done nothing but play around with our money and have fun. Well, to a certain extent, it is true. But it is not the Palestinian people to be blamed, it's the Palestinian leaders who are to be blamed as well. So in that context, we can go on and on. To keep things short, I would say Muslim leaders stop being hypocritical. Be core to the value and sincere to the value of our Iman and our one Ummah and the feeling for Palestinian as part of the Ummah. If we Muslims get together, see, in 1967, when Israel was still a young country, an infant country, it bombarded and hit the Arab nations so hard they could not recover yet. And now they've succumbed to their pressure. Now they're opening embassies in every part of the Arab world. And there's nothing wrong in having good relations with and accepting and recognizing a new nation, but not at the cost of our own self, our own belief, and our own brothers. So there's a question mark again as to how genuine our Muslim leaders are towards this issue, because everyone is looking at their self-reliant, the self-profiteering or benefit. As long as we look into that, this issue is never going to be resolved through Muslim leaders. We have to get united, stand against the unhumanitarian process. See, we have OIC with 57 member states. Have they ever done anything to fight against these atrocities and genocide, the so-called genocide? Nothing. So what is the purpose of OIC? Just to get together and have fun and, the pompousness and the grandeur they have in every meeting? It's utter nonsense. Unless and until the Muslim leaders are genuine in their fight against this apartheid regime, Palestine will always be a dream for the Palestinians. Number one. Number two, the ceasefire issue. I don't think ceasefire is an answer to any conflict. It is a temporary halt, and we never know when this ceasefire will break and whoever will breach it. So I personally believe ceasefire is not an answer at all. There should be a permanent solution, be it one state, two state, whatever state. Let us live in peace. Let the Palestinians and the Israelis, we are going a step ahead, live side by side and respect each other and value each other's tradition, culture, religion, political ground, and in every aspect, let's live together and be at peace with each other. Unless and until this is achieved, and let me tell you another thing, which if I may say so, outsiders cannot impose a force upon any solution upon anyone. It has to be the Palestinians and the Israelis which need to get together, discuss, and sort out their issues if they want to work things out. It is as if in a relationship, a wife and husband have a fight and outsiders do mediate. But unless and until the wife and husband want to settle down and resolve their issues, no one can support or help. So my straightforward answer is ceasefire is not an answer. Conflict resolution cannot be imposed upon others. It has to be resolved between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and both must respect each other and have the right of self-determination, self-autonomous and self-rule, and live peacefully for the sake of humanitarian and civilization. The third question was whether a new Security Council would emerge. It's a big question mark, and as a student of international affairs and relations myself, and I would appreciate your and all the best with your PhD for that. I would look forward to an answer from you at a later stage as to whether UN could do anything or a new Security Council could achieve anything as such. There have been hundreds of resolutions since 1948 against atrocities, genocide in Israel, in other parts of the world. None have ever been implemented unless and until bigger countries saw it at the expense of others in their own benefit. For example, we saw Iraq being destroyed, Afghanistan being destroyed by US and allied forces on the premises of UN resolution. Well, now, if they're so faithful to the UN Security Council and its resolution, what about UN resolutions against Israel since 1967? No one cares. So I have my question mark over here again, with all due respect, that I don't think, although I've been part of the UN, I still advise them from time to time. It's more of an elites club rather than any, it's good on humanitarian work. It's good on other aspects. I'm not totally undermining UN. It is doing a lot of good work. But on the political side, I would say it does not matter what they say. It is the right of the might that is working in political arena today. So if US wants, European Union wants to do anything, they will do it irrespective of what the UN Security Council says. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.
Sir, you may want to answer the last question about the social media movement.
Can you please repeat the question? I don't mind.
So about the social media movement by the Jewish people who encourage the Palestinians' independence, right? So is the movement enough to solve the problem?
To give a pressure to US, for example. Yeah.
I think again, I would be self-critic rather than pointing fingers at others, because if you're pointing fingers at others, you must remember that one finger goes the other way, three comes towards me. If the world is developing technologically or in any other way, why we Muslims cannot be part of it and take advantage of it? You know what I mean? I've been to seminaries, I've been to a lot of religious sermons, and we talk about going back 1400 years. And we talk about Salafus Salihin, we talk about Sahabas, and we talk about the ways things were happening 1400 years back. And I've always been a strong advocate of looking forward, going in ahead in advance from an Islamic perspective. I've been a student of Islamic research and scholars. I've done the Tafsir al-Quran, and I've developed a model of Islamic economics myself. And through that, I believe that we should be looking ahead. So going to the question of social media, in today's world, technology has taken a giant leap. See, now I am in India, from Australia, you are in Indonesia, and people from Jordan or America or Europe might be watching us. The global scenario has become so compact due to technology, thanks to technology. Now, why not take advantage of it? We Muslims must take advantage of this. A handful of Jewish people can influence the world so drastically that they can get public opinion or global opinion or political opinion in their favor. Why can't we Muslims who have talent, who have money, who have people around us, who have 57 countries, if not 64 Islamic nations, and yet we are so far behind. They have media with them, they have social media, they have electronic media, they have technology with them. We don't use them. So I believe that we Muslims must take advantage, go ahead and work together if with non-Muslims required to use social media to the best of our capability and ability. And I don't think it will be enough. However, given the influence of social media and the influence of the propaganda that goes through social media, it does impact common people. But at a political level, as far as my experience and understanding goes, though social media is currently playing a good and strong role, uh, we need to do more than that to mobilize a proper solution for the humanitarian purpose. Thank you.
Right.
I hope that answers.
Thank you.
Thank you for yeah. Thank you for the answer. And to Pak Yusa or Pak Luthfi, do you have anything to add to the question?
Okay, I have a little opinions. In my opinions, that we both the conflict resolutions for the Palestine case that I think many countries I ever thought before in the previous my speech that many countries in the world have to have a strong commitment. They have to together have to push the UNs as the international bodies to make a change, to make revolutions in their organizations, especially how they can to erase the veto rights for the 5 countries, if it is possible, uh, to make the equality among the state members of the UN itself. If the veto right is still have uh, uh, what getting by the 5 countries, I think for some sensitive case, it will be closed or veto by the big states only, and we cannot solve the problems if the main interest is only on the side of the West or the only US allies itself. And about the social media, I know the social media now this become the main instruments for us, for everyone in the world to spread out the informations. Even we use Facebook, which created by Mike Zuckerberg. As we know, he is also as a Jews. And there are so many other social media which also be taken over by Facebook itself, such as Instagram and so many else social media. But we can still use the social media, such as Facebook, Instagram, and anything else to give the truth information to many peoples in the world. What happened in Gaza? What happened in West Bank? Even the Jews also try to build their own propaganda in the world, but we also can to create our own informations. We tell the truth what happened in Gaza, what happened in Palestine, uh, uh, how many people injured, how many people died after the Israel bombardment in Gaza, and how Israel police then act after the commitment of ceasefire itself, as we know that after the ceasefire is released by two groups, Israel government and also Hamas itself, then the Israel police still cope, still still arrest some people in the complex of Al-Aqsa after they are praying Jum'ah. I think that very big problems why the Israel governments cannot act cannot commit to their agreement. I think that's my point for the answer for the question. I mean.
All right, thank you. To
Thank-
Pak Luthfi, do you have anything to add?
Just a little, maybe. I'd like to add
Yes, please.
my argument about the question. First, Israeli-Palestinian conflict can be, how about the national leader, another national leaders or Muslim, especially Muslim leaders? I think Israeli-Palestinian conflict, according to a constructivist approach in international studies, we can see Israeli and Palestinian conflict as a political commodity that is frequently utilized, that is frequently used by another national leaders, including national Muslim leaders, especially in Middle East, and of course maybe here in Indonesia, as kind of political commodity. Why? Because every national context outside Israel and Palestine, furthermore outside the Middle East, has very different context that is not directly linked into the conflict. I mean, for example, in Indonesia, the president has to think about the conflict between opposite opinion about who support Israel and who support Palestine. In Indonesia, it is kind of not a difficult thing because almost of the population in Indonesia are Muslim. I mean, it is kind of easier for a national leader to speak clearly about his position in the context of Israeli and Palestinian conflict. But for example, if we see in the US, for example, Joe Biden, the new president, or in the UK, for example, Boris Johnson, or in many Western countries, it is a little bit harder. It is a little bit difficult for them. Why? Because they have linkage to the Israeli or Jewish community lobbyists, for example. They have kind of political transaction between Israel and his or her country that it cannot be that easy for another national leader to speak clearly that he or she support Palestine, because it is kind of cost and benefit analysis for any national leader, including national Muslim leader around the globe. I mean, especially in the Middle East. Let's see for example, the Saudi, the king of Saudi, or the Muslim leaders in Middle East that I think is closer to the conflict. I mean, because they live in the same region, they has same language, they can share the feelings because they live near between the Palestinian and their country. Jordan, for example, or Egypt, the neighboring country of Gaza Strip. What is the position of those national Muslim leader against Israeli and Palestinian conflict? I think it is quite hard for them. Why? Because they have their own constituent in their own countries. That is not necessarily that he or she can support the Palestinian and Israeli. looking at this case, my argument is up to now, Israel and Palestine conflict is seen by them, by another national political leader, as only political commodity. And I agree with Mr. Mohammed, and I agree with Mr. Djuyandi, because until now, there is no concrete procedure, a concrete action from another countries, not limited to Muslim countries, especially countries that support human rights issue, humanitarian intervention, for example. They are silent and even ignore what happened in Gaza in recent weeks. Now, I'd like to argue that the Israeli and Palestinian conflict will be a political commodity to another national leader. And then how can we achieve peace then, beside the ceasefire that has been happening since several weeks in Gaza, especially in Gaza and Israel? I think if they keep their meaning construct, again, I will argue about the meaning construct. I will argue about the narration that makes they exist in the political conflict there. As long as the Israeli keeps their own story about the promised land, for example, about the legitimate and justified occupation towards Palestinian land, for example. And then on the other hand, as long as the Palestinians see Israeli as kind of the total enemy and its citizen, I think the conflict will remain. And what will we do? What should we do is that we deconstruct the meaning construct. I mean, we have to deconstruct the narration of each stakeholder in order, for example, to push the bigger organizations such as United Nations to create, for example, kind of solution, for instance, two-state solution, for example, or getting back to the agreement in 1948, for example. So I think that's all my opinion that we can discuss further. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the answer. So we still have about 30 minutes left for the Q&A session. So anyone who have question, you may ask right now. So please, anyone? You can type your questions in the chat box or raise your hand and deliver your question directly on mic. So while we're waiting for the questions to coming in, I have a personal question for Mr. Mohammed. So I want to ask you because you are an advisor for the UN, right? Can you tell me how is your experience involved in the UN regarding the Palestine-Israel issue, and why does the UN fail to solve this crisis? Although I've already heard about the analysis and everything, and I think it's obvious to everyone, but I'm just curious to hear from you, your experience, because you are directly involved in the UN and you have sort of the access to the the black box side the UN's policymaking. So yeah.
To be honest with you, I don't have a direct answer as of now because I myself am confused and always confused as to the United Nations, which is the second version of the World League of Nations post-Second World War and a result of the Marshall Plan, if you like, was supposed to be creating a harmonious civilized society around the world. But since its inception or its creation, have we seen any constructive or productive thing happening around? I doubt, to be honest with you. I know that's why I've never wanted to be direct employee of the United Nations. As an advisor, I'm from outside and I can talk against it or in favor of it. To be very honest with you, United Nations just pass resolutions. We have 198 members, or sometimes one or two going up and down, and they all come together with the Security Council 15 member vetoes, the 5 veto members and all. It doesn't make sense. The structure needs to be changed. Things are different from what it was in 1945 or 48. Number one. Number two, if leaders have, as Brother Luthfi said, that if people have genuine sense of resolving the issue, the leaders, when I say people, they can resolve it in few months, if not days. But they are not genuine. As Brother Luthfi said, yes, I agree, and I appreciate the fact that you brought up through your analysis that this whole issue has become a political commodity. And as I pointed out to you in my lecture about the Suez Canal, which was a direct pointing to the fact, it's all money matter, it's all commercial. If this resolute problem, see, through Palestine and Israel issue, there are a lot of other issues which are going around, right? You look at things around the world, even in Indonesia, for instance, although I'm not well literate enough to talk about Indonesian politics, but it has its impact as a Muslim Ummah, as I said. Anything goes around, comes around, and it's all, okay, Palestine issue, Israeli issue, America is Israel, Israel is America, or so on and so forth. If the leaders have genuine intention to resolve the issues, the world will be a much better place to live in. The United Nations has become elite club. As I said, they do a lot of humanitarian work very well. They're doing a lot of good work, the food program, the UNESCO program, children UNICEF program, other. But politically, I think it is stifled. To be honest with you, I don't know if I'll be fired tomorrow, but I'll be daring enough to say that the United Nations political agenda is stifled and is dominated by countries which believes in might is right. Does that answer your question? Well, we can go on for a while, but straightforward, I don't believe United Nations or political leaders have a genuine and good intention of resolving issues, rather than making a commodity of the political issues, as Brother Luthfi said.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the answers. And we actually have a question from someone. What is your opinion about the narrative of Israel citizens' human rights that is used for degrading the Free Palestine movement, knowing that this narrative is often used to sustain domination over Palestine? So,
me or?
well, anyone who wants to answer, to Mr. Pak Yusa, maybe you want to answer the question?
Can you repeat, Kirana?
What is your opinion? Okay. What is your opinion about the narrative of Israel citizens' human rights that is used for degrade the Free Palestine movement, knowing that this narrative is often used to sustain domination over Palestine?
Okay, I think when we are talking about the narrative that which used by the Israeli peoples, that first we have to look about what Israel's history perspective that have been used by them to take the land of Palestinians, and also how they argue about they also have the rights for their own land that have been promised by God, and also for the Muslim itself, like us, that we have put our concern about the history of the Al-Aqsa Mosque itself that located in Jerusalem. And I think that both of us, between the Muslims, between the Jews, have our own narrative to be proposed by us to tell to the people that we have the rights for the lands. And but the main point between the conflict in the land of Jerusalem, that as the Luthfi ever said that the big matter is about the political concerns. And also Dr. Jawad Mohammed also said about the main concerns also come from the money itself, that so many funds, so many political interests arise and playings between the politicians in the UN itself, in my opinion, the UN itself. So that's why this case has never been ending. And like I ever predicted, maybe in the next months or maybe in the next year, the situations will appear again and will happen again, and then so many victims will arise and will publish in front of us in the media. But all we can do is only screaming, demonstrate to the elites to stop this mass killing, and we have to criticize them. But in my opinions, I have a big hope to make a concrete solutions, such as how to give the independence, the absolute independence for the Palestinians, not only for some countries, but also, I mean, until now, that only a few countries acknowledge Palestine as a state, as the independent state, but for some else that they have still ignore Palestine as a state. That's the big problem. And what we have to do is we have to struggle for the independence of Palestinians and increase their status in the UN, and give their rights to have their own economics, their own military, their own autonomy, and so many anything else.
All right, thank you for the answer. Maybe Pak Luthfi wants to add something.
Okay. Sorry, could you please repeat the question or the comment?
What is your opinion? Okay, what is your opinion about the narrative of Israel citizens' human rights that is used to degrade the Free Palestine movement,
Okay.
knowing that this narrative, yes.
All right, thank you, Kirana, and for the question. All right, so according to my opinion, the conflict of Israel and Palestinian, we can see that the conflict there is not only the matter of conflict between a community or a society and another society. I mean, we have to see that conflict in the level of idea or discourse, so we can see there is a battle before the real battle in the field. I mean, there is a conflict or a contest between the ideas constructed by the Israeli government and the Palestinian people about the truth about what happened there. For example, as I said before, the logic of self-defense that is being used frequently by the Israeli government. It is justifying the attack held by the Israeli government towards Palestinian, but on the other hand, as the Palestinian is constructed as a group of terrorists, or they are dominated by a group of terrorists there. So the attack held by the Palestinian fighters or Palestinian militia towards the civilian in Israel cannot be justified, and it has no legitimacy, and so it can be done and it is wrong. So this is the narration, this is the story that is constructed frequently over and over by the Israeli government. The fact is basically they fight each other. They launch, for example, missiles or rockets, and of course, frequently Palestinian has more victims because there is unbalanced power between the Israeli government or so-called government, sovereign government, and of course the Palestinian people. So this is kind of unbalanced war between a so-called country, occupying country, and then the Palestinian society. So we have to see that the argument about to protect and defend the civilian Israeli civilians from the attack of a group of terrorists in Gaza, for example. It is kind of effective discourse, effective idea, effective meaning construct that is being used by the Israeli government, not only to dominate the mainstream media in the globe, but also it gives advantage, political advantage at the level, at domestic level in Israel. As I said before, Netanyahu needs political support to create a coalition in Knesset, in its parliament. So in order to create a solid, kind of strong political consolidation inside Israeli politics, in terms of discourse, Netanyahu needs to create an enemy outside Israel. This is the logic that is constructed by the Israeli government and of course by Netanyahu to consolidate the power inside Israel, to give political advantage for Netanyahu to consolidate the powers domestically, and then he may win the election, the next election, for example. So this kind of a strong link between the regional politics and of course domestic politics. And again, as I argue, of course, before we see or analyze the real conflict between Israeli government and Palestinian people, we have to be aware that there is a conflict before that, which is a discursive contest or idea contest that is being a basis, political basis to create another judge, another justification to get a kind of political legitimacy, and so on and so on and so on. So Israel can deliberately say that the attack of Palestinian people is the attack of terrorist group, as they are called as terrorist group. So they are criminal, they're terrorizing our citizen, and it is justified enough to defend ourselves and attack back the targeted in Gaza Strip, for example. So the judgment, the frontier between the sovereign state and the so-called terrorists, it is the matter, is the problem, the real problem between Israeli and the Palestinian conflict. So we, as the citizen, as the world citizen outside Israeli and Palestinian conflict, we should deconstruct this story. We should deconstruct this discursive meaning or meaning construct to gain the truth that happened between Israeli and Palestinian conflict. I think that's my opinion on the question. Thank you.
May I
Great.
add,
Thank you.
as I said, may I add on this just quickly? As I said, I 100% agree with Brother Luthfi that there is a conflict between a sovereign state fighting against terrorism. And as I said in my lecture, can you call a person fighting for his homeland a terrorist? And who names them terrorists? What about state-sponsored terrorism? If, say, Sister Kirana is at her home and I go and attack her at her home and she tries to defend herself, and because I have the power, I will call her a terrorist and I will become a saint. What about state-sponsored terrorism where hundreds and thousands of children and women and innocent civilians have been massacred since 1948 in Israel, in Palestine, in the whole of the Arab states? As I said, yes, there have been wrongs done to the Jewish brothers in Europe, but an eye for an eye will make the world blind. You cannot construct a concept whereby saying, because we are attacked, and as I said, one Israeli life is equivalent to 1,000 Palestinian lives. What sort of humanitarianism is this? That's my big question mark. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the answer. So we actually have 10 minutes left. So yeah, I still open the question session. So anyone who wants to ask something, please raise your hand or type your question in the chat box. All right, Taufan Malaka raised his hand. Please deliver your question now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity. Also, let me be clear that, in my humble opinion, that we all, I think, international community, right now already known what is the real problems in Israel and Philly in Palestine conflict today. We all already know what is the real problem. What the only one problem is we cannot move beyond the real problem. What is the real problem? The real problem is it's like occupation of Palestine. That's the real problem. And then we cannot negotiate with, with America, and we cannot negotiate with Israel. So this is the real problem, that international community cannot move what is called like partition solution between Israel and Palestine. Negotiate in terms of what benefits very much for Israel, but of course not for Palestine. So that's my opinion. So what I mean, like, can we move? Can we produce like the best solution beyond the mainstream politics right now? Let's say, can we go to the let's say progressive, religious, and socialist one government, one state that accommodate that could make socialist state that respect human right, respect everybody, respect Jews, Christian, Islamic, yeah, Muslim, and that's my opinion. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for your opinion. To whoever opinion, yeah, you can respond right away.
Yeah, if you recall my lecture when I talked about the three aspects of understanding Israel-Palestine conflict, I talked about social, religion, and spiritual one, political and humanitarian. Now, what Pafan Malaka says is a resolution based on religion. I personally believe, yes, religion and culture does play a very strong role in today's country. As Brother Luthfi also spoke about it, that religion has been used as a weapon to control or to play politics. I personally believe that being on a common ground, if you recall what I said about the historical context of the Jewish being protected by Muslims and invited by Muslims to stay in Jerusalem, if they appreciate the past, accept the present, and accommodate with the current situation, we Muslims must be tolerant, and we have always been tolerant, and we must be tolerant towards others and work together. Because Islam stands for love, peace, prosperity in context of harmony. We are not Muslims if we are not talking about love, peace, and harmony. Now it is up to others to contribute to that. And if we take socio-cultural and religious aspect to it, I believe culturally there are a lot of differences and we need to appreciate that. Let's find a common platform. I've been working on this for a while on finding a common platform on religious ground for a lot of religions around the world. If we get a common platform, inshallah, we will find a good solution. Thank you.
All right, thank you. To Pak Yusa or Pak Luthfi, do you want to share your thoughts on this?
I think that's enough for me.
All right.
Kiran, I have something.
Yes,
there.
please.
All right, thank you. Okay, Taufan, thank you for the question. All right, according to my opinion, it is impossible to support Palestinian people as a sovereign and freedom country as long as, again, I agree with Mr. Mohammed that said that as long as construct or differentiation between the so-called sovereign country of Israel and the so-called Palestinian that is group of terrorists, that idea still exists. I think it is quite impossible to support Palestinian as a freedom country. I mean, in terms of supporting Palestine as a freedom country, a sovereign country, we need to kind of criticize, deconstruct, and disarticulate that hegemonic idea that is constructed by the Israeli government, and of course by its Prime Minister Netanyahu about the use of the term self-defense, the so-called self-defense. We have to criticize, we have to make another citizen or what citizen aware about that hegemony at the global level. I think that is the basis if we want to support Palestine as a freedom country. And furthermore, we can't rely the efforts to support Palestine as a freedom country merely Palestine. I mean, I agree with Pak Yusa and Mr. Mohammed there is a kind of political commodity that is used by another national leader, including Muslim leader, including the leader of countries in Middle East, including the neighboring country. I think that the Palestinians should unite first. I mean, there is a kind of domestic politics between Hamas and Fatah, between the Palestinians that live in Gaza Strip and the Palestinians that live in West Bank. I mean, they should unite. If we think flashback to our memory, as for example, I'm sorry for Mr. Mohammed. I'd like to talk about Indonesian experience in fighting Indonesian freedom from Dutch colonialization. I think Palestine should unite first. Palestinians should unite first between a strong leader, for example, like Yasser Arafat in the past, and then can escalate the international political lobby and create a kind of coalition with another Muslim country or Western. It is not limited to Muslim country. I think, for example, Ireland in Western Europe is also supporting the Palestinian. I think to be a freedom country. So the first thing is that to unite the political groups, the political element inside the Palestine at the first place, and then gain they can live inside and then gain international support, including the United Nations, for example. And then we, as the citizen outside the Palestinian or outside the Palestine and Israel, we can deconstruct the hegemony of the idea that this differentiate between the so-called society that is dominated by a group of terrorists. I think that's my point. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Pak Luthfi, for sharing your thoughts for the last time. So that was actually the very last question and comment from our participant. Unfortunately, the time is up, and I have the pleasure to have you with us to cover the Palestine-Israel issue from different perspective. Thank you for joining us today. To Mr. Mohammed, to Yusa, Pak Luthfi, and also Abu Karol, who's here with us. I really appreciate your expertise and your time for sharing your in-depth knowledge. I hope this discussion will bring us to new understanding of this issue. So yeah, that concludes our general lecture. I hope I can see you very soon. So thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you. It's a pleasure.
Thank
you
you,
very much, and
Dr.
all the best.
Thank you, Dr.
everyone.
For your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed.
Thank you, Kirana. Thank you for everyone who have attended this.
Thank you, Kirana.
See you again.
Thank you.
Salam from Indonesia.